Marcus Thompson had worked as head of security at the prestigious Wellington estate for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for what he would discover on that foggy November morning. The sprawling mansion belonged to the wealthy Ashworth family, known throughout the county for their pharmaceutical empire and charitable foundations. Marcus had always prided himself on maintaining the highest level of discretion and professionalism, qualities that had earned him the complete trust of Mr. James Ashworth and his family. The day began like any other. Marcus arrived at the estate at precisely 6 in the morning, conducting his routine security sweep of the grounds. The Wellington estate stretched across 200 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, ancient oak trees, and pristine walking paths. The main house, a magnificent Georgian mansion built in the 18th century, stood majestically at the center of it all, its limestone facade gleaming even in the pale morning light. As Marcus made his way through the main corridor, he noticed something unusual. Ashworth's private study was slightly ajar, which was highly irregular. James Ashworth was a man of strict habits and meticulous organization. He never left doors open, especially not the door to his most private sanctuary where he conducted his most sensitive business affairs. Marcus approached the study cautiously, his hand instinctively moving toward the radio clipped to his belt. Through the gap in the doorway, he could see papers scattered across the normally immaculate mahogany desk. Books had been pulled from their shelves and left open on various surfaces throughout the room. The antique Persian rug was askew, as if someone had been searching underneath it. His first instinct was to call the police, but Marcus knew the Ashworth family valued their privacy above all else. Any scandal or unwanted attention could damage their carefully cultivated reputation. Instead, he decided to investigate further before making any decisions that might prove embarrassing to the family. Stepping into the study, Marcus immediately noticed that the massive oil painting of the estate's founder, Cornelius Ashworth, was hanging at an odd angle. Behind it, he could see the edge of what appeared to be a wall safe. The painting had been moved, and whoever had done so had been in such a hurry that they hadn't bothered to straighten it afterward. The safe itself was an impressive piece of Victorian engineering, with intricate brass fittings and a complex combination lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. But what caught Marcus's attention was that the heavy steel door was standing wide open, revealing an interior that appeared to be completely empty. As he examined the scene more carefully, Marcus began to piece together what might have happened. There were no signs of forced entry into the house or the study. Whoever had opened the safe knew the combination, which meant it had to be someone within the family or someone who had been given access by a family member. The thought troubled Marcus deeply. In his 15 years of service, he had never known any member of the Ashworth family to act in such a disorganized manner. James Ashworth was a methodical man who planned every aspect of his life with military precision. His wife, Catherine, was equally organized and proper. Their son, David, though somewhat rebellious in his youth, had matured into a responsible adult who now helped manage the family business. Marcus decided to check the security footage before jumping to any conclusions. The estate's comprehensive surveillance system recorded everything that happened on the property, though the family's private quarters were monitored less extensively out of respect for their privacy. Making his way to the security office in the basement of the mansion, Marcus settled in front of the bank of monitors that displayed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the property. He began reviewing the footage from the previous evening, fast-forwarding through hours of empty corridors and silent rooms. It was just after midnight when something caught his attention. A figure appeared in the corridor outside the study, moving purposefully but quietly toward the door. Marcus rewound the footage and watched more carefully. The person was wearing dark clothing and seemed to know exactly where they were going. They moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the layout of the house. As the figure entered the study, Marcus tried to make out any identifying features, but the camera angle and lighting made it impossible to see the person's face clearly. What he could see was that they went directly to the painting and began working on the safe behind it. This wasn't a random break-in. This was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The process took nearly an hour, during which the mysterious figure carefully removed various items from the safe, examining each one in the dim light before either setting it aside or placing it in what appeared to be a briefcase. When they were finished, they left the study exactly as Marcus had found it, with papers scattered and the painting hanging askew. Marcus made copies of the relevant security footage and then began a thorough search of the study. looking for any clues that might reveal what had been taken, or who might have taken it. As he carefully examined the scattered papers on the desk, he found mostly routine business correspondence and financial documents. Nothing seemed particularly sensitive or valuable enough to warrant such a dramatic theft. But then, underneath a leather-bound ledger, Marcus discovered something that made his blood run cold. It was a single sheet of letterhead paper from the law firm of Blackwood, Sterling and Associates, one of the most prestigious legal firms in the country. The letter was dated just 3 days earlier, and it was addressed to Mrs. Catherine Ashworth. The partial text that was visible made Marcus's hands tremble as he read it. The letter appeared to be discussing the division of assets and custody arrangements, using legal language that could only mean one thing: divorce proceedings. But that wasn't the most shocking part. At the bottom of the page, Marcus could see a signature line with the name Lady Margaret Pemberton typed underneath. Lady Margaret was Catherine's sister, a woman known throughout high society for her charitable work and her seemingly perfect marriage to Lord Henry Pemberton. She was also David Ashworth's aunt and had always been considered one of the most stable and traditional members of their social circle. The idea that she might be involved in divorce proceedings was almost incomprehensible. Marcus realized he was holding what could be explosive information that might destroy not just one family, but potentially 2 of the most respected families in the region. The implications were staggering. If Lady Margaret was indeed seeking a divorce from Lord Pemberton, and if these papers contained details about hidden assets or family secrets, it could explain why someone had been so desperate to retrieve them from the safe. As he continued searching through the remaining papers, Marcus found additional fragments of legal correspondence, financial statements with account numbers that had been partially obscured, and what appeared to be copies of property deeds for estates he had never heard the family mention before. It was becoming clear that the Ashworth family's financial affairs were far more complex and secretive than he had ever imagined. The sound of a car engine in the driveway interrupted Marcus's investigation. Through the study window, he could see the familiar black sedan that belonged to James Ashworth pulling up to the main entrance. His employer was returning earlier than expected from his business trip to London, and Marcus knew he would have to make a decision about what to tell him. Marcus quickly gathered all the papers and documents he had found, careful to arrange them exactly as they had been when he first entered the study. He couldn't risk alerting Mr. Ashworth to the extent of his investigation until he had a better understanding of what was really happening. As footsteps echoed in the main hallway, Marcus took one final look around the study, committing every detail to memory. He had a feeling that this discovery was only the beginning of a much larger and more complicated mystery. The safe had been opened for a reason, and whoever had done it possessed knowledge that could potentially destroy the carefully constructed lives of some of the most powerful people in the country. The door handle turned, and James Ashworth stepped into his study, his usual composed demeanor intact despite the early hour. Marcus watched carefully for any reaction as his employer surveyed the room, but James's expression remained perfectly neutral. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely had no idea that his most private sanctuary had been violated just hours before his arrival. Marcus knew that whatever happened next would test every skill he had developed during his years in security work. He was no longer just protecting property. He was potentially sitting on information that could change lives forever. The question was whether he could uncover the truth before someone else got hurt, and whether he was prepared for the consequences of what he might find. The morning fog was beginning to lift outside the study windows, but Marcus felt as though he was stepping deeper into a mystery that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the family he had served so faithfully for so many years. The discovery in the safe was just the beginning, and he had a feeling that the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking than anything he could have imagined. James Ashworth entered his study with his usual measured stride, setting his leather briefcase down on the mahogany desk with practiced precision. Marcus watched from the doorway as his employer began his morning routine, apparently oblivious to the fact that his private sanctuary had been thoroughly searched just hours earlier. The older man's silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early morning flight from London, and his navy blue suit showed no wrinkles from travel.
"Good morning, Marcus," James said without looking up as he began sorting through the papers on his desk. "I trust everything has been quiet during my absence." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he watched James handle the same documents he had carefully examined earlier.
Yes, sir. Very quiet. Though I should mention that I noticed the study door was slightly open when I made my morning rounds. I wanted to ensure everything was secure. For the briefest moment, James's hands paused over the papers, but his expression remained neutral. I see. Perhaps Catherine came in to retrieve something. You know how she occasionally needs access to our financial records for her charity work. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but Marcus noticed that James didn't make eye contact when he offered it. In 15 years of working for the family, he had learned to read the subtle tells that revealed when someone wasn't being entirely truthful. James Ashworth was many things, but he had never been a skilled liar. Of course, sir. I'll make sure to check with Mrs. Ashworth about any future access needs, Marcus replied, maintaining his professional tone while carefully observing his employer's reactions. As James continued reviewing his papers, Marcus noticed something interesting. The man wasn't actually reading them. His eyes were moving too quickly across the pages, and he was clearly looking for something specific. When James reached for the leather-bound ledger that had been covering the legal letter Marcus discovered, his movements became more deliberate. The letterhead from Blackwood, Sterling, and Associates was no longer there. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what this meant. Someone had returned to the study after he had left and before James arrived. Either that, or James himself had removed the evidence of the legal proceedings involving Lady Margaret Pemberton. The implications of either scenario were deeply troubling. "Sir, would you like me to have Mrs. Peterson prepare your usual breakfast?" Marcus asked, referring to the estate's head housekeeper. He needed an excuse to leave the study and continue his investigation without raising suspicion. Yes, that would be fine. "And, Marcus, I'll be having some guests later today for a private meeting. Please ensure we're not disturbed, and ask Mrs. Peterson to prepare the blue sitting room for afternoon tea." This was unusual. James typically held business meetings in his study or the formal conference room. The blue sitting room was traditionally used for social gatherings with family friends. The choice suggested that whatever meeting James was planning would require a more casual, less intimidating atmosphere. Marcus made his way to the kitchen, where he found Mrs. Peterson already preparing the morning meal. Eleanor Peterson had worked for the Ashworth family for nearly as long as Marcus, and her loyalty was absolute. She was also one of the few people on the estate staff who might have insights into the family's private affairs. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. Mr. Bobwig. Ashworth is back from London and would like his usual breakfast. He's also requested that the blue sitting room be prepared for guests this afternoon." The elderly housekeeper looked up from the eggs she was whisking, her sharp blue eyes reflecting surprise. "Guests in the blue room? That's unusual. Did he mention who would be visiting?" "No, but he emphasized that they shouldn't be disturbed. Mrs. Peterson, I need to ask you something confidential. Have you noticed anything unusual about the family lately? Any changes in routine or behavior that might seem out of the ordinary?" Eleanor Peterson had worked in service long enough to understand the importance of discretion, but she also recognized when something serious might be affecting the family's well-being. She set down her whisk and lowered her voice. "Now that you mention it, there have been some things. Mrs. Ashworth has been receiving more telephone calls than usual, and she's been having conversations in the garden where she thinks no one can hear her. Last week, I found her crying in the conservatory, but when I asked if she needed anything, she insisted she was perfectly fine. This confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion that whatever was happening with Lady Margaret's legal troubles was somehow connected to the Ashworth family's current situation. The theft from the safe was beginning to look less like a random crime and more like a desperate attempt to control damaging information. "Has Mrs. Ashworth mentioned her sister recently? Any plans for Lady Margaret to visit the estate?" Mrs. Peterson's expression grew more concerned. "Funny you should ask. Just yesterday, Mrs. Ashworth received an urgent telephone call that left her quite upset. After she hung up, she asked me to prepare the guest wing, saying that Lady Margaret might need to stay with us for an extended period. When I asked about Lord Pemberton, she just said that Lady Margaret would be traveling alone." The pieces were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was more complicated than Marcus had initially suspected. It appeared that Lady Margaret was indeed facing some kind of crisis that required her to seek refuge with her sister. The legal documents in the safe might have contained information that could be used against her in divorce proceedings, or perhaps evidence of financial arrangements that needed to be kept secret. Marcus decided he needed to review the security footage more carefully. There might be details he had missed during his initial examination that could help identify who had broken into the safe. He also wanted to check the timestamps more precisely to determine exactly when the missing legal letter had been removed. Returning to the security office, Marcus began a more thorough analysis of the previous night's footage. As he watched the mysterious figure work on the safe, he noticed something he had missed before. The person was wearing gloves, but when they reached up to adjust the painting, a small portion of their wrist became visible. There, clearly caught by the camera, was a distinctive gold bracelet with what appeared to be a family crest. Marcus enhanced the image as much as possible and felt his breath catch in his throat. The crest was unmistakably the Pemberton family coat of arms. The person who had broken into the safe was connected to Lord Henry Pemberton's family, which meant this situation was far more serious than a simple domestic dispute. But who could it have been? Lady Margaret herself seemed unlikely. She would have asked her sister for access to any documents she needed. Lord Pemberton was a possibility, but the figure in the footage appeared smaller and more agile than the rather portly nobleman. That left other members of the Pemberton household, or someone acting on their behalf. Marcus realized he needed to find a way to warn the Ashworth family without revealing the full extent of his investigation. If the Pembertons were actively trying to suppress evidence related to their divorce proceedings, they might pose a real threat to anyone who possessed damaging information. His contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of David Ashworth, who burst into the security office with obvious urgency. "Marcus, I need to speak with you privately. It's about my Aunt Margaret." David was 32 years old, with the same intelligent gray eyes as his father and the determined chin that ran in the Ashworth bloodline. He had always been friendly with Marcus, treating him more like a trusted advisor than merely an employee. But today, there was something different in his demeanor, a tension that suggested he was dealing with something far more serious than typical family drama. "Of course, Mr. David. What's troubling you?" "Last night, I received a call from my aunt. She was calling from a phone booth, if you can believe that, because she was afraid her regular phone might be monitored. She told me that she had discovered some things about her husband that could destroy both our families if they became public. She said she had hidden important documents in my father's safe, but now she's afraid someone might try to steal them." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that David was unknowingly describing exactly what had already happened. The theft had taken place, and Lady Margaret's worst fears had been realized. "Did she give you any specifics about these documents or what kind of threat your family might be facing?" David ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture Marcus recognized as a sign of extreme stress. "She mentioned something about financial irregularities in some charitable foundations, and possibly evidence of tax evasion or money laundering. She said that if Lord Pemberton felt cornered, he might try to implicate our family in his schemes to reduce his own legal exposure." The situation was becoming clearer, but also more dangerous. If Lord Pemberton was involved in financial crimes and was using his position in society to cover his tracks, then anyone with evidence of his activities would be in serious danger. The theft from the safe wasn't just about divorce proceedings, it was about preventing evidence of criminal activity from reaching the authorities. "Mr. David, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me that you'll let me handle this situation carefully. Your family's safety may depend on how we proceed." David's expression grew grave as he nodded his agreement. Marcus quickly explained about discovering the open safe, the scattered papers, and the security footage showing someone with a Pemberton family crest breaking into the study. He also mentioned finding fragments of legal correspondence before they mysteriously disappeared. "My God," David whispered. "If they're willing to break into our home to steal evidence, what else might they do to protect themselves?" "That's exactly what I'm worried about. We need to assume that your family is now considered a threat by some very dangerous people. But we also can't go to the police without more concrete evidence, or we risk exposing your aunt to even greater danger." David stood up and began pacing the small security office, his mind clearly working through the implications of everything Marcus had told him. "What do you recommend we do?" "First, we need to make sure your aunt is safe. If she's still using public phones and afraid to stay in her own home, she's obviously terrified. Second, we need to find out exactly what evidence was taken from the safe and whether any copies exist elsewhere. And third, We need to be prepared for the possibility that Lord Pemberton or his associates might try to intimidate your family directly. I can contact my aunt and arrange for her to come here where we can protect her. As for the evidence, I know my father keeps backup copies of important documents in a safety deposit box at the bank. The question is whether he knows about any of this yet. Marcus considered this information carefully. If James Ashworth had backup copies of the stolen documents, then the theft might have been ultimately pointless. But it also meant that the family was still in possession of evidence that powerful people wanted to suppress. We need to approach your father carefully. If he doesn't know about the break-in yet, we need to control how and when he learns about it. His reaction could determine whether this situation escalates or can be resolved quietly. David nodded grimly. You're right. My father has always prided himself on handling problems through proper legal channels. But if he realizes that criminals have violated his home and threatened his family, he might do something that puts all of us in danger. As they discussed their next steps, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were already several moves behind in a very dangerous game. Someone with significant resources and connections had successfully infiltrated the Wellington estate and stolen crucial evidence. They had done so with precision and planning that suggested professional involvement. The question now was whether Marcus and David could protect their family and help Lady Margaret escape her situation before their opponents realized that their theft had been discovered and that backup evidence might still exist. Time was running out, and the stakes were higher than anyone had initially realized. David Ashworth left the security office with a determined expression, promising to contact his aunt immediately while Marcus continued monitoring the estate's surveillance systems. The afternoon sun was beginning to filter through the tall windows of the mansion when Marcus noticed an unexpected arrival. A sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows was making its way up the long driveway, followed by a second identical vehicle. The cars were expensive but not ostentatious, the kind typically used by successful businessmen or government officials who preferred to travel without drawing attention. As they pulled up to the main entrance, Marcus felt his instincts sharpen. These were not the usual social visitors that the Ashworth family typically entertained. From the security monitors, Marcus watched as 4 men emerged from the vehicles. They were all dressed in well-tailored dark suits and moved with the coordinated precision of professional security personnel. The man who appeared to be their leader was tall and imposing, with silver-gray hair and the kind of commanding presence that suggested military or intelligence background. Marcus immediately picked up his radio and contacted the main house. Mrs. Peterson, we have unexpected visitors arriving. Gentlemen in business attire. Please inform Mr. Beret. Ashworth immediately. Mr. Ashworth is in his study and asked not to be disturbed, but I'll let him know about the visitors, came the housekeeper's voice through the radio. As Marcus watched the monitors, he saw James Ashworth emerge from the house to greet the visitors personally. The interaction was cordial but formal, with handshakes and brief conversations before the entire group disappeared into the mansion. What troubled Marcus was that his employer showed no surprise at their arrival, suggesting that this visit had been planned despite the earlier claim about afternoon guests. 20 minutes later, David returned to the security office, his face pale with worry. I've been trying to reach my aunt for the past hour, but she's not answering any of the numbers she gave me. I'm starting to fear that something may have happened to her. Marcus turned from the monitors to face David, his expression grave. We may have a more immediate problem. Your father just received some very official-looking visitors, 4 men who definitely aren't here for a social call. And based on your father's reaction, I don't think their arrival was unexpected. David moved to the monitors and studied the footage of the visitors' arrival. I don't recognize any of them, but they certainly look like government officials or investigators. Do you think this is connected to whatever my aunt discovered about Lord Pemberton? I'd say that's highly likely. The timing is too convenient to be coincidental. The question is whether your father is meeting with them as a witness who can provide information or as someone who might be considered complicit in whatever illegal activities are under investigation. As they discussed the implications, Marcus's radio crackled to life. It was Mrs. Peterson, and her voice carried an unusual tension. Marcus, Mr. Ashworth would like to see you in the blue sitting room immediately. He said to bring David with you if he's available. David and Marcus exchanged worried glances, being summoned together suggested that whatever was happening involved both estate security and family matters. They made their way through the mansion's elegant corridors toward the blue sitting room, passing portraits of previous generations of Ashworths who had built and maintained the family's reputation over centuries. The blue sitting room was one of the more intimate spaces in the mansion, decorated in soft azure tones with antique furniture that had been in the family for generations. As they entered, Marcus was struck by the tension in the air. James Ashworth was seated in his usual chair, but his typically perfect posture showed signs of strain. The four visitors were arranged around the room in positions that allowed them to observe both entrances. "Marcus, David, please sit down," James said, his voice carefully controlled. "I need to explain what's happening, and I need both of you to understand the gravity of our situation." The leader of the visiting group, who appeared to be in his 50s, with sharp blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. "I'm Inspector Harrison from the National Crime Agency. We're investigating a complex financial crime network that involves several prominent families and charitable organizations. Recent developments have brought some concerning information to our attention." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he realized that their worst fears were being confirmed. The theft from the safe, Lady Margaret's desperate phone calls, and now the arrival of federal investigators all pointed to a scandal of enormous proportions. Inspector Harrison continued, "We have evidence that suggests Lord Henry Pemberton has been using his position in various charitable foundations to launder money for international criminal organizations. The amounts involved are substantial, potentially tens of millions of pounds over several years." David leaned forward in his chair, his voice tight with concern. "Inspector, what does this have to do with my family? We've had minimal business dealings with Lord Pemberton beyond normal social interactions." "I'm afraid it's more complicated than that, Mr. Ashworth. Our investigation has revealed that some of the fraudulent transactions were processed through accounts associated with Ashworth family businesses. We believe that Lord Pemberton may have forged authorization documents to make it appear that your family was knowingly participating in these activities." James Ashworth's face had gone ashen as the full implications became clear. "Are you saying that he's trying to frame us for his crimes?" "That's exactly what we're saying, and we have reason to believe that he's become increasingly desperate as our investigation has progressed. Last night, several key pieces of evidence were stolen from what we believe was a secure location. Evidence that could prove your family's innocence while confirming Pemberton's guilt." Marcus realized that this was his moment to contribute crucial information to the investigation. "Inspector, I may be able to help with that. Last night, someone broke into Mr. Ashworth's private safe and removed several documents. I have security footage of the incident." Inspector Harrison's attention immediately focused on Marcus. "That's extremely valuable information. We need to review that footage immediately. Can you also provide us with a list of what was taken?" "The theft was very selective. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. They took legal documents that appeared to be related to divorce proceedings involving Lady Margaret Pemberton, as well as some financial records and what looked like property deeds." "Lady Margaret," Inspector Harrison said, exchanging glances with his colleagues. "We've been trying to locate her for the past 48 hours. She contacted us 3 days ago claiming to have evidence of her husband's criminal activities, but she hasn't responded to our attempts to arrange a formal interview." David's face grew pale with worry. "My aunt called me last night, terrified that she was being watched. She said she had hidden evidence in my father's safe, but she was afraid someone might try to steal it. We've been unable to contact her since then." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of David's statement. If Lady Margaret had been the source of the evidence in James's safe, and if she had subsequently disappeared after the theft, then her safety was in serious jeopardy. Inspector Harrison pulled out his phone and quickly made a call, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end. When he finished, his expression was grim. "We're immediately issuing a welfare check on Lady Margaret's last known location. In the meantime, I need all of you to understand that you may be in considerable danger." "What kind of danger?" James asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand the seriousness of their situation. "Lord Pemberton and his associates have demonstrated that they're willing to commit burglary to protect themselves. If they believe your family still possesses evidence that could expose their criminal network, they may escalate to more serious crimes. We're talking about people who have already stolen millions of pounds and have international criminal connections. Marcus stepped forward. Inspector, I've been head of security here for 15 years. What do you recommend we do to protect the family? First, we're posting protective surveillance around the estate. Second, we need you to gather any backup copies of the documents that were stolen and place them in our protective custody. Third, no one leaves the estate without coordination with our team. James stood up slowly, the weight of the situation clearly affecting him. Inspector, my family has spent generations building a reputation based on integrity and honest business practices. The idea that someone could use our name and resources for criminal activities is devastating. Mr. Ashworth, we understand the impact this situation has on your family's reputation. That's exactly why we need to resolve this quickly and definitively. The evidence Lady Margaret provided to us initially was compelling, but what was stolen last night may have included additional proof that could clear your family's name entirely. David looked around the room at the investigators, his father, and Marcus. What about my mother? She doesn't know about any of this yet, and if we're truly in danger, she needs to be informed and protected. Inspector Harrison nodded. We'll need to brief Mrs. Ashworth immediately. Everyone in the household needs to understand the potential risks and the security protocols we're implementing. As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine Ashworth appeared in the doorway of the blue sitting room. She was an elegant woman in her late 50s, with silver hair perfectly styled and the kind of poise that came from decades of managing complex social situations. But today, there was worry in her eyes that suggested she was already aware that something serious was happening. James. Mrs. Peterson said there were important visitors, and David, I've been trying to reach Margaret all day without success. Will someone please explain what's going on? The moment of truth had arrived. The family's comfortable private world was about to be shattered by revelations that would test everything they thought they knew about their relationships, their reputation, and their safety. Inspector Harrison stepped forward to begin what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations the Ashworth family had ever faced. Marcus positioned himself near the window, his trained eyes scanning the grounds for any signs of unusual activity. He had a feeling that the arrival of the investigators might have been observed, and if Lord Pemberton's people were as dangerous as suggested, they might already be planning their next move. The estate's peaceful atmosphere was about to be replaced by the reality of a criminal investigation that could change everything for the family he had sworn to protect. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens, but Marcus knew that darkness was falling on more than just the day. The Ashworth family was about to discover that their carefully ordered world had been invaded by forces far more dangerous and sophisticated than anything they had ever imagined. Catherine Ashworth sank into the nearest chair as Inspector Harrison explained the investigation involving her brother-in-law and the potential threat to her family. Her composed exterior began to crack as the full scope of the situation became clear. But it was when the inspector mentioned Margaret's disappearance that she truly broke down. Margaret called me yesterday morning, Catherine said, her voice trembling. She was terrified, crying, saying that Henry had discovered she'd been copying his private documents and that she feared for her safety. I told her to come here immediately, that she would be safe with us. She said she would arrive this evening after dark. Inspector Harrison leaned forward intently. Mrs. Ashworth, this is crucial information. Did Lady Margaret give you any indication of where she was calling from or what her travel plans were? She said she was staying at a small hotel outside Cambridge under an assumed name. She was afraid to use her credit cards or go anywhere Henry might expect to find her. She promised to call when she was close to the estate. Catherine looked around the room desperately. She should have called by now. Something's happened to her, hasn't it? Before Inspector Harrison could respond, Marcus's radio crackled urgently. It was one of the estate's groundskeepers, speaking in a voice tight with concern. Marcus, you need to come to the East Gate immediately. There's been an accident on the main road. A car went off into the drainage ditch, and the license plate matches the one you asked us to watch for. The blood drained from Catherine's face as she realized what this meant. Lady Margaret's journey to safety had been intercepted before she could reach the sanctuary of Wellington Estate. David immediately stood up, reaching for his coat. We have to go help her, he said urgently. Inspector Harrison held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Ashworth, if this is connected to our investigation, that accident scene could be extremely dangerous. My team will handle the response. With respect, Inspector, that's my aunt out there, possibly injured or worse. I'm not going to sit here while she needs help. Marcus stepped forward, understanding the family's urgency, but also recognizing the tactical reality of the situation. David, if this wasn't an accident, then whoever caused it might still be in the area. Going to the scene without protection could put you in the same danger that Lady Margaret faced. Inspector Harrison was already coordinating with his team through his radio, calling for emergency services and additional investigators to secure the accident scene. I understand your concern for your family member, but we need to approach this systematically. If Lord Pemberton's people are responsible for this incident, they may be watching to see how we respond. The next hour felt like an eternity as they waited for reports from the accident scene. Catherine paced the blue sitting room while James sat in stunned silence, clearly struggling to process how quickly their orderly lives had descended into chaos. David stood at the window, watching the estate's entrance for any sign of the emergency vehicles that had been dispatched to help his aunt. When Inspector Harrison's radio finally crackled with an update, everyone in the room turned toward him expectantly. His expression remained carefully neutral as he listened to the report, but Marcus noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested the news wasn't good. Lady Margaret is alive, but she's been seriously injured, the inspector said carefully. Her car appears to have been forced off the road by another vehicle, and the scene shows clear evidence of foul play. She's been transported to Cambridge General Hospital, and my team is maintaining security around her. Catherine collapsed back into her chair, relief and worry warring across her features. Is she conscious? Can she talk? She's conscious but sedated due to her injuries. However, she was able to communicate some crucial information before the paramedics arrived. She confirmed that the documents she hid in your safe contained evidence of financial transactions that directly implicate Lord Pemberton in money laundering activities. James looked up sharply. Are you saying that those documents could prove our innocence in this entire affair? More than that, according to Lady Margaret, those documents contained evidence that Lord Pemberton had been forging authorization signatures to make fraudulent transactions appear legitimate. Some of those forged signatures were yours, Mr. Ashworth. The implications hit James like a physical blow. Not only had his brother-in-law been stealing money through illegal schemes, but he had been specifically using James's identity and business reputation to provide cover for his crimes. The violation felt deeply personal, beyond the legal ramifications. Marcus's security training kicked in as he realized what this revelation meant for the family's immediate safety. Inspector, if Lord Pemberton knows that Lady Margaret survived and might have shared information about those documents, he's going to become increasingly desperate. The theft last night might have only been the beginning. That's exactly what we're concerned about. We've been monitoring communications associated with Lord Pemberton's known associates, and there's been a significant increase in activity since last night. We believe they're coordinating a more aggressive response to contain this situation. David turned from the window, his face set with determination. What does that mean for our safety? Are we under siege in our own home? Inspector Harrison consulted with his team through his radio before responding. We're implementing enhanced security protocols around the estate effective immediately. No one enters or leaves without clearance from my team. We're also bringing in additional protective assets in case Lord Pemberton's people attempt a direct assault. The word assault hung in the air like a physical presence, driving home the reality that the Ashworth family was no longer dealing with a financial scandal, but with potentially violent criminals who viewed them as a threat to be eliminated. Catherine stood up suddenly, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. What about the staff? Mrs. Peterson, the groundskeepers, the other people who work here? We can't put them in danger because of our family's problems. We're evacuating all non-essential personnel to safe locations. Inspector Harrison assured her. Only those absolutely necessary for estate operations will remain, and they'll be under our protection. As if responding to Catherine's concern, Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway of the blue sitting room. The elderly housekeeper's usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain, but her voice remained steady. Mr. P.T. Ashworth, I've been with this family for 23 years, and I'm not leaving now when you need loyal people around you. I've sent the younger staff members home as the inspector requested, but I'm staying to help however I can. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the housekeeper's loyalty, but also a growing sense of responsibility. The people who had chosen to stay were counting on him to help protect them from threats they had never imagined facing. Inspector Harrison's radio interrupted the moment with an urgent transmission. "Sir, we have movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from different directions, all with occupants matching surveillance photos of known Pemberton associates." The inspector immediately moved into tactical mode, coordinating defensive positions with his team while addressing the Ashworth family. "Everyone needs to move to the center of the house immediately. Stay away from windows and doors. This may be an attempt to intimidate you, or it could be something more serious." As they moved through the mansion toward the more secure interior rooms, Marcus couldn't help but notice how surreal the situation had become. Just 24 hours earlier, he had been conducting routine security patrols of a peaceful country estate. Now he was helping coordinate the defense of the property against organized criminals who were willing to commit violent acts to protect their illegal activities. The family gathered in the mansion's library, a windowless room in the center of the building that offered the best protection from outside surveillance or attack. Inspector Harrison positioned his team at strategic points throughout the house while maintaining radio contact with additional units that were responding to support them. "Mr. Tuxis Ashworth," Inspector Harrison said, "I need to ask you about the backup documents you mentioned earlier. If we can get those into evidence, we might be able to resolve this situation before it escalates further." James nodded grimly. "The safety deposit box is at Barclays Bank in Cambridge. I have copies of all the major financial documents related to our charitable activities, including the authorization forms that Pemberton apparently forged. We'll need to retrieve those documents as soon as it's safe to do so. In the meantime, I need everyone to understand that the next few hours could be critical. These people have already demonstrated that they're willing to use violence to suppress evidence of their crimes." David moved closer to his parents, his protective instincts clearly activated. "Inspector, what exactly are we facing here? How dangerous are these people?" Before Harrison could answer, the sound of engines could be heard approaching the main house. Through the library's thick walls, they could hear vehicles pulling up outside, followed by the slam of car doors and the sound of multiple footsteps on the gravel driveway. Marcus checked his radio to confirm that the inspector's team was in position to respond to whatever was about to happen. He had spent his career preparing for security threats, but nothing had prepared him for the possibility that his employer's own family members might be the source of mortal danger. The footsteps approached the main entrance, and they could hear the heavy brass knocker being used with unusual force. Someone was demanding entry to Wellington Estate, and based on the timing and circumstances, it was clear that this was not a social call. Inspector Harrison held up his hand for silence as he coordinated with his team through hand signals. Whatever happened next would determine whether the Ashworth family's nightmare was just beginning or whether justice would finally catch up with the criminals who had invaded their lives. The knocking continued, growing more insistent, and Marcus realized that they were about to face the most dangerous moments in the estate's long and distinguished history. The heavy brass knocker continued its demanding rhythm as Inspector Harrison coordinated with his team through silent hand signals. The library felt increasingly claustrophobic as the Ashworth family huddled together, listening to the sounds of what appeared to be multiple people gathering outside their front door. Marcus positioned himself between the family and the library's entrance, his years of military training automatically taking over as he assessed potential threats and escape routes. The mansion's thick stone walls provided excellent protection, but they also limited visibility and movement options. Inspector Harrison spoke quietly into his radio, confirming positions with his team members stationed throughout the house. "All units report ready. Front entrance team, what's your visual on the subjects?" The response crackled back through his earpiece, loud enough for everyone in the library to hear. 6 individuals, all male, business attire but clearly armed. Leader appears to be Lord Henry Pemberton himself. They're making demands for entry and claiming they have legitimate business with the Ashworth family. Catherine gasped audibly at the mention of her brother-in-law's name. The idea that Henry would personally come to their home to intimidate them revealed just how desperate he had become. James placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders, his own face showing a mixture of anger and disbelief. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of voices engaged in heated discussion just outside the main entrance. Inspector Harrison held up his hand for continued silence as he listened to reports from his surveillance team. Sir, they appear to be discussing alternate entry points. 2 subjects are moving toward the rear entrance, and another is circling toward the conservatory windows. David started to stand, his protective instincts overriding his caution. They can't just invade our home like this. We should confront them directly and demand that they leave. Marcus gently but firmly guided David back to his seat. Mr. David, that's exactly what they want. If they can provoke a direct confrontation, they can claim they were defending themselves, or that the family was being uncooperative with legitimate authorities. Inspector Harrison nodded his agreement. Mr. Ashworth is correct. Lord Pemberton is likely hoping to create a situation that he can later misrepresent to investigators or the media. Our advantage right now is that we have the legal authority to detain him, while he's clearly operating outside the law. The radio crackled again with an update from the perimeter team. Inspector, we have confirmation that the vehicle registration plates match those associated with known criminal associates. We also have visual confirmation of weapons. This information changed the tactical situation dramatically. What had appeared to be an intimidation attempt was now clearly an armed invasion of private property by known criminals. Inspector Harrison immediately shifted into arrest protocol, coordinating with additional law enforcement units that were en route to the estate. All teams, we are now treating this as a hostile situation with armed subjects. Implement containment protocol and prepare for arrests. The family listened with growing amazement as they realized that their home had become the center of a major law enforcement operation. The peaceful halls of Wellington Estate were now filled with professional investigators and protective agents working to neutralize a criminal threat. Mrs. Peterson's voice came through the house intercom system, calm but urgent. Mr. Ashworth, the gentlemen outside are insisting that they speak with Lady Margaret. They claim she is staying here as a guest and that they have urgent family business to discuss with her. Inspector Harrison immediately responded through the intercom. Mrs. Peterson, this is Inspector Harrison of the National Crime Agency. Do not open any doors or provide any information about family members. We are handling this situation. James looked at the inspector with newfound respect. They're using Margaret's condition as an excuse to gain entry. If we hadn't known about the investigation, we might have actually let them in to help them find her. Exactly. Lord Pemberton is sophisticated enough to create plausible cover stories for his criminal activities, but his desperation is showing through his tactics. Coming here personally with armed associates reveals just how cornered he feels. The sound of shattering glass suddenly echoed through the mansion, followed by the sharp blast of a security alarm. Someone had broken through one of the conservatory windows, confirming that this was no longer a negotiation, but an active invasion. Marcus immediately moved toward the library door, his protective instincts fully engaged. Inspector, I know this house better than anyone. I can guide your team to intercept whoever just broke in while avoiding putting the family at additional risk. Negative. You stay with the family. My team has blueprints of the house and we're better equipped to handle armed intruders. The sound of running footsteps could be heard throughout the mansion as Inspector Harrison's team moved to respond to the break-in. Radio chatter increased as units coordinated their movements through the estate's complex layout of corridors and interconnected rooms. Intruder contained in the conservatory. Subject is armed but not offering resistance. Requesting backup for additional subjects attempting entry through rear service door. Catherine was gripping James's hand tightly, her composure finally beginning to crack under the strain of having violent criminals invading the home where she had felt safe for decades. How did our lives become so complicated so quickly? Yesterday, our biggest concern was managing the autumn charity fundraiser. David moved closer to his parents, creating a protective circle within the library. Mother, we're going to get through this. These people made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. We have resources and support that they didn't count on. Inspector Harrison received another radio transmission that caused him to smile grimly. Sir, we have positive identification on the subjects at the rear entrance. Both individuals have outstanding warrants for financial crimes related to the Pemberton investigation. We're proceeding with arrests. This is better than I hoped, Harrison told the family. Not only are we catching them in the act of invading your property, but we're also apprehending people we've been looking for in connection with other criminal activities. The sound of sirens could now be heard approaching the estate as additional law enforcement units arrived to support the operation. What had begun as a family's private crisis was now becoming a major law enforcement victory against an organized criminal network. Marcus's radio suddenly activated with Mrs. Peterson's voice, sounding more excited than alarmed. "Marcus, you should see this. They're arresting people all over the property. There are police cars everywhere, and I can see them putting Lord Pemberton himself in handcuffs." Through the library's thick walls, they could hear shouting outside as arrests were being made and rights were being read to the criminal suspects. The immediate threat to the Ashworth family was being neutralized, but the emotional impact would take much longer to resolve. Inspector Harrison received a final radio transmission that brought a look of satisfaction to his face. "All subjects in custody. Property is secure. Evidence team is en route to process the vehicles and weapons." The tension in the library began to ease as everyone realized that the immediate danger had passed. James stood up slowly, still processing everything that had happened. "Inspector, what happens now? How do we rebuild our lives after something like this?" "Mr. Ashworth, your family has been the victim of an elaborate criminal scheme. The evidence we've gathered today, combined with Lady Margaret's testimony and the backup documents you mentioned, should completely clear your family's name and provide the evidence needed to prosecute Lord Pemberton and his associates." Catherine looked up hopefully. "And Margaret? Will she be safe now? With Lord Pemberton and his primary associates in custody, Lady Margaret will no longer be in immediate danger. She'll need time to recover from her injuries, but she's also going to be recognized as a key witness whose courage helped expose this criminal network." David walked to the library door, eager to see the results of the law enforcement operation. It's hard to believe that this all started with Marcus discovering an open safe door. Marcus reflected on the previous 24 hours with amazement. His routine security check had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that reached into some of the most prestigious families in the country. Sometimes the smallest details can reveal the biggest problems, Mr. David. In this case, whoever broke into the safe was too confident and made just enough mistakes for us to piece together what was really happening. Inspector Harrison gathered his materials and prepared to coordinate the next phase of the investigation. The Ashworth family's ordeal is over, but there will be legal proceedings and media attention as this case develops. I recommend that you work with your attorneys to protect your privacy while cooperating fully with our investigation. As they prepared to leave the library and return to the normal areas of their home, Mrs. Peterson's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth, I've prepared tea in the morning room when you're ready. I thought you might need something normal and comforting after all this excitement." The simple offer of tea in their own home felt like a return to civilization after hours of fear and uncertainty. The Ashworth family had learned that their carefully ordered world could be invaded by forces beyond their control, but they had also discovered that truth and justice could prevail when good people worked together to expose criminal activities. Marcus took one final look around the library that had served as their sanctuary during the crisis. Tomorrow he would return to his regular duties as head of security for Wellington Estate, but he would never again take for granted the peaceful atmosphere that had been such a fundamental part of the property's character. The estate's long driveway was now filled with law enforcement vehicles and investigators processing evidence, but Marcus knew that eventually the crowds would disappear, and the Ashworth family would reclaim their privacy. They had survived a test that few families would ever face, and their bonds had been strengthened by the experience. The safe in James Ashworth's study would be repaired and reinforced, but more importantly, the family had learned that their most valuable protection came not from locks and alarms, but from their loyalty to each other and their commitment to doing what was right, even when it was difficult and dangerous. As the afternoon sun began to set over Wellington Estate, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens and ancient oak trees, the property was beginning to return to its natural state of peaceful elegance. The criminal threat had been eliminated, justice was being served, and the Ashworth family was safe to continue building their legacy of integrity and service to their community. Marcus knew that this experience would change all of them in fundamental ways, but he also believed that they would emerge stronger and more appreciative of the things that truly mattered in their lives. The discovery in the safe had led to revelations that no one could have predicted, but it had also proven that sometimes the greatest challenges can lead to the most important victories.